So first off, thank you so much for coming out tonight in this beautifully warm recital hall. Very cozy. So tonight's recital is all music of Russian composers that lived and worked sometime during the Soviet era. I'm playing music from three composers, Rachmaninoff, Prokofiev, and Nikolai Kapustin. So that was, of course, Flight of the Bumblebee, arranged by Rachmaninoff. The original Flight of the Bumblebee was an orchestral interlude in an opera by Rimsky-Korsakov. It actually wasn't meant to be a really big part of the opera at all, just a little interlude in the middle of the story, but people really liked it, and they started arranging it for just about every instrument. So that was a very famous version by Rachmaninoff. I was curious yesterday, and I looked up to see if anybody had sung it, and they indeed, people have sung it. It's terrible. Don't look it up, just save you the pain. So Rachmaninoff is the earliest of the three composers I'm playing tonight. He lived from 1873 to 1943. He made his living as a pianist and a composer. And one of the things he was really famous for was having big hands. So since he wrote music for himself to perform mostly, he wrote it with obscenely big chords. And his music's so good that the rest of the pianists, we suffer through it and play it anyway, but really can't be playing that. So Rachmaninoff got a bit of a rough start into composition. His first symphony just failed miserably. The critics didn't like it, the audience didn't like it, he didn't even like it. So he swore off composing for quite a while, for about 4 years actually. Thankfully, he did some therapy and decided to give it another shot, and we're very, very thankful that he did. So by 1917, which was the year of the Russian Revolution, Rachmaninoff had a really big career in Russia and abroad. He was kind of spending his time all over the place. He was mostly based in Moscow then. In 1917, the political tensions were really heating up. The Bolsheviks were coming to power, getting rid of the imperial government. And Rachmaninoff was getting really worried for the safety of himself and his family. It was getting harder and harder to leave Russia. You couldn't just leave anymore. He got a last-minute concert invite in 1917 to do a recital tour of Scandinavia, 10 recitals, and he thought, this is my chance. I'm going to get out. So he took it, and he fled Russia. Unfortunately, he had to make it look like he was just going on a concert tour with his family, so he couldn't take much money, much of his belongings or anything. So once he finished the concert tour of Scandinavia, he was like, I have no money. What am I going to do about this? The United States different cities have been offering him a lot of money to come to the US. A lot of it was to conduct, which he did not want to do. And he wasn't very excited about the idea of going to the United States. He had done a concert tour there previously, and he didn't have many good memories of it for whatever reason, so he was kind of resistant to the idea. But they kept offering him so much money that he was like, all right, seems like a good move. So he moved him and his family to the United States. He started out in New York and ended up in San Francisco. Let's see. Good news is he ended up liking the United States very much. He enjoyed the freedom to be an individual, and he ended up becoming a citizen in 1943, 8 weeks before he died. But he made it. Even though he ended up really liking the United States, he always wanted to return to his home in Russia. And at a certain point, around the 1930s, he was actually banned. He was labeled an enemy of the state, mostly because he had written a letter to a newspaper in New York that was criticizing the Soviet government. And they're like, you can't be doing that. So he was banned, and his music was banned. So he never got to return to Russia. So the next piece I'm going to play is also by Rachmaninoff. It's called Elegy, and an elegy is a song or a poem that is expressing sorrow or lament, usually for someone who has died, which I think is a really, really lovely idea. So in this elegy, you can hear a lot of this sorrow and this lament, but you can also hear some hope, like maybe things are going to get better. So I hope you enjoy Elegy by Sergei Rachmaninoff. latest of the three. So he was born in 1937 during the Soviet Union, and he died pretty recently, actually, in 2020. Kapustin's big thing was this fusion of classical and jazz forms. So he really liked jazz piano, but he considered himself a classical composer and musician. So he took a lot of jazz rhythms and chords, and he fused them with classical styles, like an etude. Jazz was a really risky thing to be involved in during the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had a thing called the Committee of Arts Affairs, and it governed and censored everything that composers were doing. And jazz, at different points in the Soviet Union, sometimes the government loved it. It was like a fully government-sponsored thing. And at other times, it was completely banned. You would be in trouble if you played any jazz, because it was considered a Western art form and too individualistic. So you never knew what it was going to be. So many composers were really pressured to conform to what the government wanted them to be composing, on this idea called socialist realism, which I'll talk about more with Prokofiev. Kapustin managed to avoid a lot of scrutiny from the government, and I think it's two reasons. One, he really wasn't as famous as Rachmaninoff or Prokofiev. He didn't have as much of an international performing career ahead of time before the Soviet Union, and really not as much one after either. And then two, he said in an interview he gave in 1990 that his music was optimistic and accessible, and people just really liked listening to it. So even though it used a lot of elements of jazz, which was or was not okay, depending on the time of day, people still enjoyed his music, and so he kind of got away with it. So he said he never got censored during his career. I like to think of Kapustin as maybe quietly and cheerfully pushing the boundaries just a little bit. So the piece I'm going to play by Kapustin is his Concert Etude Opus 40, number 6, Pastoral. And this piece makes me think of the last few minutes at work right before summer break. It's a good feeling. etude tableaus is called Little Red Riding Hood. Rachmaninoff, in these etude tableaus, he wanted them to act as a painting, so something that would set a scene or tell a story. So this one, as the title suggests, tells the story of Little Red Riding Hood. So there are two main themes in this etude. The first is the wolf. So every time you hear that, it's the wolf or wolves. And then Red Riding Hood. She's not having a very good time. So I'm sure you can all think of different versions of Red Riding Hood with different endings. So sometimes Red Riding Hood gets away, and sometimes the wolf wins. So you're just going to have to see who wins in this version by Rachmaninoff. Another drink first. I've done of that was at a retirement home a few weeks back, and I told, the whole story. And at the very end, some woman was just like, oh no. And no one has ever been that invested in something I played before, and it felt really good. Okay, so the last piece I'm going to play for you is also by far the longest. It's Prokofiev's 7th Piano Sonata. It's one of his war sonatas, and it's nicknamed Stalingrad. Very cheerful. So Sergei Prokofiev is right in the middle. He lived from 1891 to 1953. Out of our three composers tonight, he had by far the most complex relationship with the Soviet regime, because Rachmaninoff really just got out. Kapustin managed to have no issues. But Prokofiev did not get off nearly so easy. Prokofiev, like Rachmaninoff, also had a very successful early career abroad and at home. So by the 1930s, he was splitting his time pretty evenly between Moscow and Paris. And for a long time, he was able to make going back and forth work. But in 1936, Stalin began really tightening restrictions on travel and arts and a whole bunch of other stuff. And they started putting pressure on Prokofiev and his family to return to Russia. So he did. Prokofiev almost immediately started having difficulties there because that thing I mentioned, socialist realism, which is what the arts committee was looking for in their music. Socialist realism, the basic idea was that art should serve the state. And whatever people are writing or composing or creating should be ideologically supportive and something that the state could use to further their political ideas. For music, this meant they wanted something kind of traditional sounding, catchy, patriotic, definitely not what Prokofiev was getting famous for composing over in Europe. He was all about dissonance and exploring new forms and styles. And that's not what they wanted. He got in trouble right away. His first big piece that he tried to premiere over there was a cantata for the 20th anniversary of the October Revolution. In the audition before the Committees of Arts Affairs, it got shot down. That piece actually didn't get performed until 13 years after Prokofiev died. That's how thoroughly it got shot down. So he immediately tried to adapt, because he didn't want to be in trouble with his government. So he wrote a bunch of songs using Soviet-approved poetry, and wrote a bunch of film music. So this piano sonata was written in 1939. This was kind of during the peak years of World War II for Russia, and ironically that meant Prokofiev and other composers actually had a little bit more freedom to compose in just these few years. Because, the government was busy elsewhere. They didn't have that much time to focus on what you were writing. So Prokofiev's biographer, Daniel Jaffa, he believes that these sonatas, numbers 6 through 8, really show kind of Prokofiev's true feelings about kind of the war and this dissonance between what he was being asked to write by his government and what he wanted to write for himself. The sonatas initially actually did pretty well. Sonata number 7, the one I'm playing, won a Stalin Prize second class, which was kind of their version of a Pulitzer, whoever you are. And sonata number 8 won Stalin Prize first class. So they actually initially did very well. So things were going along pretty okay for a while. But in 1948, something came out called the Zhdanov Doctrine, and it was put out by the head of the Committee for Arts Affairs. And in this proclamation, Zhdanov denounced 6 artists. This was, of course, Prokofiev. Also included people like Shostakovich and Khachaturian. And in this doctrine, he accused these composers of formalism and of turning music into cacophony, which is not good things. This decree only banned certain works by each composer, so Prokofiev himself had 8 works banned. One of them, ironically, was the 8th Sonata that had won a Stalin Prize. Also banned Sonata number 6. They did not ban Sonata number 7, so there you go. But the perceived threat of programming any of Prokofiev's music was just too high, even if it wasn't a banned work, so really people just stopped performing his music altogether, which is really bad for Prokofiev and his financial situation. He, again, tried to appease the authorities, like he had done early on. This time it didn't work. He tried to compose an opera called The Story of a Real Man, which I feel like is quite on the nose. But that didn't go anywhere, and he eventually withdrew from public life. And he died in 1953, on the same day as Stalin. So this sonata is his 7th sonata. It's the middle of his 3 war sonatas. It's nicknamed Stalingrad. Prokofiev did not give it this name, but he was writing at the same time this was all happening. And Stalingrad is the single largest and costliest urban battle in military history. So a lot of things were happening to Prokofiev during the year 1939 when he was composing this. Of course, all of the war stuff that was going on, that was ramping up for Russia, and it was not going well. He had an opera that was going to premiere get canceled because the director of the opera got arrested and then shot. And then Stalin wanted him to write a piece for his birthday. So Prokofiev had all these strange aspects happening in his life that didn't mesh well together. It was kind of chaotic. Oh, he did write the birthday piece for Stalin. He called it Cheers. It's more known as Hail Stalin. And it's a pretty great choral piece, actually. We can't really perform it because subject matter, but it's kind of a waste. It's really too bad. Okay, so Prokofiev's Seventh Sonata follows a lot of traditional sonata form. And sonata form was something that was developed way back in the Baroque and Classical era, 1700s. He follows it on the large scale, so there are 3 movements to the sonata, and traditionally they're fast, slow, fast, which he follows. The first movement also is sort of in sonata allegro form, which is another very traditional form. We do have the exposition, the beginning section with our 2 themes, the development, which is where you do whatever you want, and then the recapitulation, which is where you normally kind of have the exposition again, more or less. What's funny about it, though, and I feel like Prokofiev's kind of making fun of the form a little bit, is nobody knows where the recapitulation starts. You do know at some point you're definitely back into the main material again, but nobody's quite sure, nobody agrees on where that begins. So in our first movement, we have 2 main thematic bits. The first one is really kind of percussive and harsh and anxious. Prokofiev actually marks it to play anxiously. And then the second theme is slow and kind of thoughtful and wandering. So it's very contrasting. This first movement changes tempo a lot. It's not really settled in any key. Technically it's in B flat major, but we don't get any B flat major until the very last chord. And it's really unified by this triplet motif, ba-ba-ba-bum, from Beethoven's Fifth Sonata. We only get the first triplet part, ba-ba-bum. And that motif is supposed to represent fate. In this first movement, you're also going to hear a lot of military-inspired sounds, like a lot of marching and air raid sirens. The second movement is our slow movement. The main theme of this one is actually based on a Schumann song called Sadness. And the text to that is, "True, I can sometimes sing as though I were content, but secretly my tears well up and my heart is set free. Nightingales, when spring breezes play outside, sing their songs of longing from their dungeon cell. Then all hearts listen and everyone rejoices, yet no one feels the pain, the deep sorrow in the song." So it's a very sad song. The second movement also has a fantastic chromatic middle section, and then it ends with what sounds like bells tolling. And there's this amazing image I found in somebody else's program notes of a bell tolling over a burned out empty village. It's very eerie. The last movement is fast. It's a toccata. It's very, very organized. It keeps the same rhythm throughout the whole thing. One of the really cool things about the sonata as a whole is Prokofiev moves from chaos in the first movement to really structured order at the end. Toccata is another form. It means to touch, and it was meant to be a little show-off. You're just playing a whole bunch of notes. It's in 7, so it's kind of an uneven, jolty rhythm. And it's my favorite movement, so I wanted to play this whole sonata just for this last movement. So, this is the last piece. So again, thank you all so much for coming. Please come say hi afterwards. There's going to be cookies. Some of them are really cute with a big jack-o'-lantern. So thanks again for coming, and this is Prokofiev's Seventh Sonata. experience for everybody. Thank you.